like, and make sure to engage in comments. Also, share this video to your friends and story lovers, and click on the subscribe button on the screen to subscribe to Mort Effects for more real horror stories like this. It was supposed to be a perfect weekend. Just a few of us, deep in the woods, away from everything. No cell service, no distractions. Just the five of us and the eerie stillness of nature. That's what we wanted. Something different, something thrilling. Brandon was the one who found the place. He had a way of digging up weird, off-the-grid locations, and this was no different. An abandoned campsite, miles away from civilization, tucked between thick, towering trees, with a lake so still it looked like glass. "It's been empty for years," he said, grinning as we loaded up the car. "But the cabins are still there, and no one patrols the area. Free camping spot." At first, it sounded perfect, but the moment we arrived, something felt off. The dirt road leading in was barely recognizable, like nature had been trying to reclaim it. We had to push fallen branches out of the way, and by the time we reached the clearing, the sun had already started dipping behind the trees. The cabins stood there, dark and silent, their wood rotting, windows either shattered or boarded up. A metal sign hung loosely from one of the porches, its faded letters barely legible. "Clearwater Campground." "This place is sick," Jake muttered, pulling his bag from the trunk, like something out of a horror movie. I laughed, but there was an edge to it, because he was right. Mia and Rachel weren't as amused. "Are we even sure this place is safe?" Mia asked, crossing her arms as she eyed the cabins. "It doesn't look stable." "It's fine," Brandon assured her. "We'll check inside, pick the best one, and if it's bad, we'll set up tents." No one wanted to be the one to back out, so we went along with it. Inside the first cabin, the air was thick with dust, and the floor creaked under our weight. Someone had been here before us. Graffiti covered the walls, and an old sleeping bag was crumpled in one corner. But what stood out the most was the smell. Not just the dampness or the decay. Something worse, something rotten. "Ugh, no way," Rachel gagged, covering her nose. Next cabin. The second one wasn't much better. The walls had deep claw marks, like an animal had been trapped inside, and the back door had been ripped clean off. "Yeah, that's a hard pass," Jake said, backing out. We settled on the third cabin. It was still run down, but at least the walls were intact. The old bunks were covered in dust, but a quick sweep with our jackets was enough to make them usable. We set up our sleeping bags, lit some lanterns, and started a fire outside. That's when we first heard it, a low, distant whistle. It was faint, almost like the wind, but too deliberate, a slow, drawn-out tune. It carried through the trees, sending a chill down my spine. "Did you hear that?" Rachel whispered. Brandon shrugged. "Probably just the wind." But we all knew it wasn't. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The forest felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Every snap of a twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. And at some point, in that half-awake state where dreams blend with reality, I swore I heard footsteps circling the cabin. Slow, heavy. But when I sat up, everything was still. By morning, we convinced ourselves it had been nothing. Just nerves. Just our minds playing tricks. But then, we found the footprints. They weren't ours, and they led straight to our door. Brandon was the first to see them. The footprints, deep imprints in the dirt circling the cabin, stopping just inches from the door. Barefoot. Human. Okay, what the actual hell? Jake muttered, stepping back. His voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers twitched at his sides. Maybe someone else is camping out here, Brandon said, though he didn't sound convinced. Then where's their tent? Their fire? Mia's voice was sharp, cutting through the morning air. No one just wanders barefoot in the woods in the middle of the night. We all stood there, silent. The tracks were fresh, too fresh, and they were weird. The toes were long, too long, and the heel was unnaturally narrow, like whoever made them didn't walk like a normal person. Rachel swallowed hard. I want to leave. Brandon hesitated, then shook his head. We just got here. It was probably nothing. Maybe an old print that... Brandon. Mia's voice was shaking. It rained last night. She was right. The ground was still damp from the late-night drizzle. No footprints should have been there, unless someone or something had been standing outside while we slept. A cold, creeping realization settled over us. Someone had been watching us, or worse, standing right at the door. We packed up fast. There was no argument. No, let's stay one more night. No, the energy had shifted. What had started as a fun, rebellious trip now felt wrong. We stuffed our gear into our bags, double-checked everything, and made our way back to the car. But the car wasn't how we left it. The driver's side door was open. Brandon had locked it. I remembered him locking it. But now, it sat there, wide open, like an invitation. Like someone had already been inside. Jake swore under his breath, rushing forward to check the ignition. The keys were still in Brandon's pocket, untouched. But the seats were wet, like someone had been sitting there, waiting. I felt my stomach twist. Mia was breathing fast. Go, she whispered. Let's just go. Brandon didn't argue. He jumped into the driver's seat. Siege and turned the key. Nothing. The car didn't start. He tried again. Click, click, nothing. Jake slammed his hand on the dashboard. You've got to be kidding me. The engine was fine when we got here. We hadn't left the lights on. We hadn't touched anything that could have drained the battery. But now, it was as dead as the abandoned campsite around us. Rachel started crying. Then we heard it again. The whistle. Slow. Deliberate. Closer. Brandon whipped around, scanning the tree line. Who's out there? His voice cracked at the end, betraying his fear. The trees stood still, silent. But the sound hadn't come from far away this time. It had come from inside the campground, from one of the other cabins. A door creaked. Not ours, another. One we hadn't opened. I turned my head so slowly it hurt. The door to cabin 2, the one with the claw marks, was slightly ajar. It had been wide open when we checked it yesterday, but now it was barely cracked, like something was peeking through. A shadow moved. Rachel screamed. Brandon grabbed the keys again, twisting them desperately in the ignition. The car coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Get in! Get in now! We didn't hesitate. We threw ourselves into the car, slamming the doors shut just as the whistling stopped. Silence. I couldn't breathe. My pulse was pounding so hard I could feel it in my skull. Then, bang, something slammed against the back of the car. We all screamed. Brandon floored it. The tires skidded against the dirt, kicking up mud and gravel as we tore down the overgrown path. The branches that had blocked our way in scraped against the sides of the car, screeching like nails on a chalkboard. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of it. A figure. Not human. It stood in the clearing, tall and thin. Its skin stretched too tight over its bones. Its face, I don't even know if it had one. Just a long, hollowed-out mouth, open like it was mid-whistle. And then, it moved, not ran, glided, fast, faster than anything should be able to move. The road was too bumpy, too unpredictable. I thought we'd crash. I thought we'd die right there in the middle of nowhere, swallowed by the trees. But we didn't. We made it to the main road. We didn't stop driving until we reached a gas station miles away. When we finally pulled over, no one spoke. No one moved. We just sat there, the engine humming, our own breathing the only sound. Then Mia whispered, Did anyone else see it? No one wanted to answer, because that would make it real. But I saw Rachel's face in the reflection of the window, and the way her eyes filled with tears told me that yes, she saw it too. None of us slept that night. Even after putting miles between us and that cursed campsite, the fear clung to us like a second skin. We sat in the gas station parking lot, engine running, the neon lights flickering above us. No one spoke for the longest time. Finally, Jake broke the silence. We have to tell someone. Brandon laughed, a short, bitter sound. Tell them what? That we went camping and got chased by what? Something that whistled at us? Jake shook his head. I don't know, man. But whatever was out there, it was real. Rachel still hadn't stopped shaking. Her hands clutched her knees, knuckles white. We should just go home, she whispered. Forget all of this. But I couldn't, because something wasn't right. I kept going over it in my head. The footprints, the car door being open, the wet seats, the thing we saw in the woods, the way the whistling stopped the second we all got inside the car. It was almost like it wanted us to leave. A slow chill ran down my spine. That's when Mia gasped. We all turned to her. She was staring at her phone, her face drained of color. What? Brandon asked, his voice tense. Mia held up the screen. I don't remember taking this. We leaned in. It was a photo. Dark. Grainy. Taken in the middle of the night. But we could still see what was in it. It was us. All 5 of us, asleep in the cabin. The angle wasn't from inside the room. It was from outside the window. Someone, something, had been standing out there, watching us, taking pictures while we slept. I felt like I was going to be sick. Brandon yanked the phone from her hands, his breath ragged. This isn't funny. Who took this? No one, Mia whispered. I swear to you, I didn't take this. Jake grabbed his own phone, scrolling fast. Check your cameras, all of you. See if there's anything weird. Rachel hesitated, then unlocked her screen. Her hands were trembling as she opened her gallery. Then she froze. Oh my God. She turned her phone to us. It was a video, taken in the middle of the night. A short clip, maybe 5 seconds long. Someone was standing in the doorway. Not one of us. It was tall, too tall, skinny arms hanging at its sides, head tilted at an unnatural angle. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. The video ended. No one breathed. Then, a knock. Soft, deliberate, coming from the window. Rachel screamed. Brandon floored it. Tires screeched against the pavement as we sped out of the gas station, tearing down the empty highway. No one looked back. We didn't stop. Not when we passed streetlights. Not when we saw other cars. It felt like if we slowed down, if we even blinked, something would be there. Then the whistling started again. I almost crashed. It wasn't coming from behind us. It wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the car, right behind me. I didn't want to look. But my body turned anyway. The back seat was empty, but the seat belt was buckled, and the seat was wet. I screamed. Brandon swerved the car so hard we nearly went off the road. Mia was crying. Jake was swearing. Rachel had her hands over her ears, rocking back and forth, whispering, "It's not real. It's not real. It's not real." But it was, because the whistling hadn't stopped. It was louder now. The air felt wrong. The temperature had dropped. The windows fogged up in seconds. And then something moved. Not inside the car. On the outside, crawling along the roof, slow, deliberate scratching, fingernails or claws dragging across the metal. Brandon lost it. He pressed the gas so hard the engine screamed. We flew down the road, swerving wildly. Then, bang. Something slammed into the windshield. A face. No, not a face. Just a mouth. Wide, hollow, whistling. I don't know how, but Brandon kept driving. Faster, faster. The thing clung to the glass, grinning, never blinking, until we hit the bridge. The second we crossed over the river, it was gone. The weight lifted, the temperature returned, the windows unfogged. But we didn't stop. We drove straight home. For weeks, none of us spoke about it, until the calls started. Blocked numbers, always late at night. No one ever spoke. Just a single, eerie, familiar whistle. We changed our numbers. It didn't help. We moved cities. It still didn't stop. And then, one night, Rachel went missing. Vanished from her apartment. The only thing they found was her phone, sitting on her bed, recording a video, a 5-second clip of her doorway, and something standing there, watching, waiting, and then the screen goes black. But the last thing you hear before it cuts out? The whistle. Click on the subscribe button on the screen to subscribe to Mortifex for more real and true stories like this.